Tyrion and Jaime made their way through the bowels of the Red Keep. The subtle clangs of his wrist, clamped in irons, made the only noise as they crept through the halls. Jaime had sheathed needle and cat's paw secured on his weak side, and Joffrey's crossbow was over his shoulder. At some point, you're going to have to explain how you became so competent so quickly, demanded Tyrion. Worked harder, I suppose, answered Jaime. Tyrion then stepped in front and contradicted him. Worked harder? Tyrion scoffed. Something is off with you, and I can't quite place it, exclaimed Tyrion. Are you all right? Asked Tyrion, and Jaime pushed past him. I'm fine, he said. You're not having second thoughts, asked Tyrion. Because my life, it sort of depends on it, said Tyrion reluctantly. We move as planned, confirmed Jaime. Numerous stairs and turns, and they both reached the upper levels. Occasionally a Lannister soldier would charge past them completely preoccupied, the last one screaming that the dead had penetrated the city, and the Unsullied had reached the Red Keep. The brothers quickened their pace to the throne room. They reached the double doors leading to the Iron Throne. Tyrion stared at the painted map on the ground. A deafening roar was heard overhead, and Tyrion shielded his eyes with his restrained hands. Drogon then flew overhead and destroyed the eastern tower as he flew by. Tyrion slowly met Jaime's avoiding eye and spoke calmly. Jaime, why are the dragon flames blue? He asked. Tyrion had chills down his spine as snow, dust, and rock fell from the skies. Jaime's shoulders slumped. We have a lot to discuss, but afterwards. Do you trust me? Jaime asked. More than anyone, replied Tyrion. Then let's get a move on, said Jaime as he winged open the doors leading to the throne room. It had changed dramatically, Tyrion thought. Then again, a lot has happened since Tyrion stood trial on this very spot. The back wall had burned away, and a light covering of snow coated the floor, and became deeper the farther they progressed. Cersei had now noticed them from behind the throne, where she was watching the ongoing battle. She had now taken her seat as her brothers approached. Tywin roared as the brothers walked past. Tyrion did what he could to mask his apprehension concerning the beast. Cersei sat before them, unguarded. Gibbons, Sir Ilyn, and Melisandre were off to Jaime's right, on the same platform as Cersei. Tywin, Cersei's lion, was chained to the left, a small distance behind them. Jaime seemed to expect to be addressed immediately, given his accomplishment of capturing Tyrion. Cersei chose to address her executioner first.
Sir Ilyn, there are far too many prisoners present. Please unburden us,
ordered Cersei. The mute knight nodded, and before Jaime could react, Sir Ilyn cut Melisandre's throat. Blood poured from her wound as she collapsed to the ground. Jaime shouted, "No!" as tears welled in his eyes.
Curious. Did you know her?
She asked. No, Jaime lied. She didn't seem like a threat, Jaime finished.
Likely, but she was a representative of the Dragon Queen, and for that, she would die,
said Cersei calmly. Ilyn Payne now stood beside Jaime. The brothers were not expecting this.
I must admit, I have missed you,
claimed Cersei. Jaime stared down Ilyn Payne as Tyrion scoffed at her attempt to soften the moment. For the first time, Tyrion had garnered her attention. You didn't miss him, Tyrion paused. You only missed the man who loved you so much that you didn't have to love him back, said Tyrion curtly. Cersei's face stiffened. Surprising. I half expected some sort of rant.
Some type of what?
Asked Cersei. Just more ranting on Joffrey's murder, spat Tyrion. Cersei's blank stare then turned to Jaime.
You haven't told him? You realize how odd I find that,
she claimed. The Queen was temporarily distracted as she noted movement from between the throne room double doors. Tyrion noticed this distraction and turned to see a light brown direwolf calmly enter the room. Tywin had noticed as well and protested its entrance. It casually walked down to Tywin's boundary and sat attentively. Tyrion saw what he believed to be pleading in its calm blue eyes. Tyrion recognized the beast, was not looking for his attention, or Cersei's, but for Jaime's. Tywin stretched his chains to their limit and confronted the direwolf, their noses only separated by inches. Tywin incessantly roared. Still the direwolf was fixated on Jaime. Fitting. The wolf and the lion are still sizing each other up, claimed Tyrion. That they are, said an emotionless Jaime to Cersei. The queen stood and Sir Elend placed his hand on his hilt. Just then, the throne room shook. Daenerys had started another assault on the castle. Cersei stood high above Tyrion, and with great malice, she ordered,
End him.
Tyrion raised both his hands as Jaime dropped his crossbow. Wait, I just need to know 2 things before I die, asked Tyrion. Sir Elend then halted his approach.
How can I refuse a dead man's wish?
Said Cersei. Exactly how much joy did it bring you to order my execution? Asked an emotional Tyrion, and Cersei grinned.
I can't remember anything ever tasting so sweet. Even Robert's death. Now what is the last thing you have to ask of me? Asked Cersei, as Elend unsheathed his sword. Tyrion raised his hands, revealing his restrained wrists, and spoke slowly. Ash, he said. Ash?
Cersei questioned. What does it taste like? He asked. Cersei's face immediately turned from joy to stern as she screamed.
Kill him now.
Cersei beckoned. Tyrion quickly dropped his restraints to the ground. Jaime kicked his crossbow down the stairs to Tyrion's side. Jaime then drew Catspaw from his belt, whirled about, and slashed Elend's throat as he advanced on Tyrion. For my father, exclaimed Jaime to himself, as Elend Payne choked to death at the bottom of the stairs. Cersei, confused, screamed at Jaime.
Tyrion killed our father, you simpleton, she said.
Tyrion retrieved the crossbow at his feet and turned on the lion just a few paces away. Tyrion released the bolt and struck the lion squarely in the side of the head, and Summer let out a mournful howl. Tyrion dropped the crossbow to see Cersei exhale in fear. It's like killing that cunt all over again, said Tyrion gleefully. Cersei screamed at Jaime as he slowly advanced on her, catspaw in hand. Cersei regained her composure and stood tall versus her twin brother. She held the back of her own wrist as he stood a step away from her. Jaime smiled, and Cersei returned it. Cersei then suddenly slashed at Jaime's face with a dagger hidden up her sleeve. Jaime grasped her knife hand as a large piece of his face went missing. Cersei dropped her knife as she turned to him, but was mortified at what she saw. Tyrion approached from the side, just past the throne, his mouth agape. Jaime's face slowly slid off of Arya's and floated to the floor like a feather. Cersei's face turned white, and a defiant, smug grin spread across Arya's scarred face.
Mangled and burned. You remind me of that rabid dog,
Cersei mocked. Arya twirled Catspaw in her left hand and pressed the blade to Cersei's cheek. When Arya spoke, she did so calmly, but furiously.
His name was Sandor,
she said, as a bead of blood trickled down Cersei's face. A thunderous crash was heard behind Cersei as she turned her back on Arya. A white wind filled the room as Arya grasped the back of Cersei's head. She could feel her fingernails scrape the scalp of the lioness, who was clearly trying to remain calm despite her obvious trembling. Arya held Catspaw at Cersei's throat as a large pair of blue eyes appeared above what remained of the Iron Throne. Arya, Cersei, and Tyrion stood still and silent as Drogon peered down on them. Tyrion suddenly realized Arya had just killed the man that murdered her father on Joffrey's orders. Tyrion's attention turned to the undead dragon that hovered over them, screeching and roaring. As the fog cleared, Tyrion couldn't believe his eyes. He expected to see the Night King on Drogon. Instead, he saw a glimpse of Daenerys. He called to his queen, with no response. Arya stood her ground, paused, and waiting to see who would flinch first. Had Bran reached Daenerys? Arya thought. Arya knew she could end Cersei, here and now. Her list complete. Any and all of her names were scratched from that same list, one way or another. She never dreamed she would have the chance to end Elend Payne and Cersei on the same day. Summer had scaled the stairs and calmly placed himself between the living and the dead. No doubt anything that could draw breath would be collectively holding it in this moment, Tyrion thought. The Unsullied burst through the throne room double doors as Drogon roared again. The blue-eyed beast craned his neck and briefly closed his eyes. Unexpectedly, Summer retreated from the throne room and probably exited, without as much as a growl. After several tense seconds, a rush of wind, Drogon then took to the sky. Queen Daenerys had left justice to be served. Drogon continued flying north as Arya watched from behind Cersei.
Get on with it then,
demanded the queen. Arya tightened her grip on Cersei's short hair as her crown fell to the ground. Tyrion bent down to retrieve it as it rolled dangerously close to Jaime's slashed face. Tyrion stood, crown in hand, and stared at his sister. Arya glared at Tyrion, though her face softened. Despite all the reasons in the world for Tyrion to hate the woman Arya was set to execute, his face was saddened. This took Arya by surprise, as she witnessed what she thought to be pity between siblings. Arya thought of Jon, and what he would think of her position. She thought of Chaol's wisdom regarding revenge. The Unsullied surrounded them, spears drawn. Arya's eyes shifted to them as she loosened her grip on Cersei. Tyrion noticed this and simply ordered, "Take her away." He stood exhausted as the Unsullied led Cersei away without protest. A solemn silence overtook the hall as Arya and Tyrion stood alone, on opposite sides of the Iron Throne. Tyrion breathed heavily and tossed Cersei's crown over the side. "He's dead then, my brother?" Tyrion asked.
Yes,
answered Arya softly. Tyrion gulped. "How?" he asked. Tyrion could barely manage the words.
he sacrificed himself and killed the Night King. Jon dubbed him the Night King Slayer,
claimed Arya. Tyrion wailed at these words as he peered over the side of the castle. Wind and snow still filled the air surrounding the castle. And Queen Daenerys, why is she riding an undead dragon? Asked Tyrion, clearly distraught.
Another sacrifice. She replaced the Night King by choice,
she clarified. A silence grew between them, and it was finally broke by Arya.
Lord Tyrion, would you please step down from there?
Arya asked. Tyrion hadn't realized how close he stood to the edge. "Now I am truly alone," cried Tyrion. Tyrion thought of the beautiful bliss that would exist if he could just stop existing. Tyrion knew what he was contemplating. He tried to convince himself out of it by focusing on something positive. He searched and searched for one positive memory. Each time he did, he was immediately reminded of the heartbreaking outcome. Tysha, Shay, his duties as Hand of the King, the Dragon Queen, and lastly his brother. All beautifully disastrous, he contemplated.
Sansa,
said Arya simply, and Tyrion's head snapped towards Arya.
She loves you,
Arya finished. Clearly, this was a shock to Tyrion, the largest of the day, in a day full of shocking events.